Good morning. It's Monday, August 4th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 668 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. I spent some time over the weekend watching Israeli television. I like to hop around from channel to channel usually, and it probably won't come as a shock to you, but the country is reeling over those sick and sadistic videos of Ron Broslavsky and Eviatar David. Israel has gone through immense trauma, starting with the 1,200 murders and 250 plus hostages taken on October 7th, then the multi-front war that followed, the steady drumbeat of fallen soldiers, the ballistic missiles from Yemen, the 12-day war with Iran, complete with more ballistic missiles from Iran, and now the political isolation stemming from the coordinated information operation engineered by Hamas and its media enablers. The deafening silence of the world media as those two young men waste away is a bitter pill for Israelis of all political persuasions to swallow. It's hard to believe that a nation of Holocaust survivors and victims of fierce anti-Semitism less than a century ago must now come face to face with similar evils. Our guest today is Andrew Fox, a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, which is a London-based think tank, a good one at that. Before stepping into the policy world, Andrew spent 6 years in the British military, serving 3 tours in Afghanistan, including one alongside U.S. forces. Recently, Andrew was on the ground in Gaza, witnessing the situation up close. So is there a famine? What is and isn't being reported? We're going to get into all of that in about as much time as it takes Al Jazeera to spread another blood libel. So hang tight. The breathless debate right now about food insecurity in Gaza is binary and completely devoid of nuance. It's the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, after all, I suppose. But let's unpack this for a minute. Look at how the debate has unfolded. Seemingly out of nowhere, Israel haters began leveling war crimes, crimes against humanity, collective punishment, deliberate attempts to starve the people of Gaza. Was this entirely accurate? No, but it fit a narrative because these people want to delegitimize Israel regardless of the facts. Israel's supporters are in some ways also culpable. They deny all charges of food insecurity. They do so because they know that Israel's enemies don't care about the facts. So why should they? The jackals were blaming Israel for a genocide before the war even started, and the blood libels continue. So Israelis and their friends are defending the world's only Jewish state. Nobody else will. But here's something you don't hear often. There is food insecurity in Gaza, but it's not systemic. There are pockets of Gaza that have enough food and other pockets that don't. This suggests that this is not war crimes. It suggests that Gaza is a complicated war zone and getting food evenly distributed is not easy. Hamas continues to fight an asymmetric urban war against Israel. The Israelis are fighting fiercely to retrieve their starving hostages and end the war. Nuance, folks. We don't see it often these days, but it usually explains things better than the vapid binary debates in our media. And those binary debates are making us dumber one day at a time. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, guess who hosted a senior Hamas delegation this weekend? Ding, ding, ding. You guessed it. The terror-sponsoring worst NATO ally ever. Yes, I'm talking about Turkey. Hakan Fidan, Turkey's current foreign minister and formerly Turkey's top spy at the MIT, kicked off his weekend by welcoming a delegation of psychotic Hamas officials to Istanbul on Friday. It was reportedly one big anti-Israel fest. Fidan lamented the purported genocide in Gaza and accused Israel of prolonging ceasefire negotiations in an effort to break Palestinian will. Senior terrorist Mohammed Darwish led the Hamas delegation. He agreed with Fidan, violently, as they say, that Israel is unwilling to compromise at the negotiating table. That is some serious bull fertilizer from the terrorist group still holding 50 hostages under horrific conditions. Darwish also lamented the lack of humanitarian aid in Gaza. No surprise there. After the meeting, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the thug-in-chief of Turkey, addressed his haters on X, asserting that the Palestinian people will live on, in quote, that blessed land watered with the blood of martyrs, end quote. Worst NATO ally ever. Headline 2, White House envoy Stephen Witkoff and U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee visited Gaza on Friday. This was framed as a fact-finding mission. The pair spent 5 hours in Gaza, inspecting aid distribution sites and meeting with officials from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and other agencies. Their goal was to assess the facts on the ground, make it clear that their aim is to ensure that food and other aid reaches Palestinians, and then return to Washington to brief the president. Hamas was not happy about the visit. On Saturday, the Iran-backed terror group released a statement accusing the White House of being a full partner in Israel's alleged war crimes and starvation and genocide and all the other things. The group claimed that Witkoff and Huckabee's trip was pure theater designed to cover up the systemic killing of women and children. Hamas vowed never to disarm so long as Israel exists. So I guess it's not going to disarm. And get this, Hamas said that it has a right to continue waging its campaign of terror because it's guaranteed by international law until Palestinians have their own state. So yes, in case you're wondering, this recent push by Western governments, including the UK and France, to recognize the state of Palestine is rewarding Hamas for terrorism. Here's looking at you, UK, France, Australia, Canada, Portugal, and all the other pandering countries that have gone down this road. Headline 3, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, as we call it, is feeling the heat here in the United States. Over the weekend, the New York Times revealed that a group of victims and relatives of victims killed or injured in Hamas and Hezbollah attacks are suing UNRWA. The plaintiffs filed a lawsuit in federal court in Washington on Thursday, arguing that UNRWA has violated anti-terrorism laws and that UNRWA USA, a nonprofit, somehow they have a nonprofit in the United States, and it fundraises for UNRWA. They're saying that UNRWA USA is complicit. The plaintiffs are seeking unspecified monetary damages. I hope they get it. A similar lawsuit is playing out in Manhattan. Both cases seek to hold UNRWA accountable, and the rap sheet of UNRWA is long. Hundreds of UNRWA employees have doubled as Hamas terrorists. Some even participated in the October 7th slaughter. And let's not forget that Hamas has long used UNRWA facilities as weapon storage and launch sites for rockets. UNRWA's lawyers maintain that the agency has diplomatic immunity and is therefore exempt. The Biden administration bought that argument, but the Trump administration is having none of that, which means more lawsuits and potentially sanctions could be in store for UNRWA. Pass the popcorn, please. All right, it's time for my conversation now with Andrew Fox of the Henry Jackson Society over there in the UK. So let's bring him on. Welcome to the program, Andrew Fox.
Jonathan, always a pleasure to join you, my friend.
You are a repeat offender, and for that, we appreciate you. Let's start with that recent time that you spent on the ground. How did you manage to get yourself into Gaza? I mean, let's face it, most people try to get themselves out. You tried to get yourself in, and you succeeded.
Well, it was the third time in Gaza during the war, but the first time I've managed to just get lucky. The other two times I've made formal media requests and it's worked. This time I happened to meet one of the senior GHF personnel in London. I asked him straight up if I could come in and write a report. And to my actual surprise, they said yes. And so about a day later, I found myself on the ground in Gaza.
And did you feel safe? Did you feel like you were in an active war zone, or did it feel relatively calm in the bubble around you?
I mean, it's always a bit of a throwback to get the body armor and the helmet on. 16 years in the army, and it, it's not my first rodeo in heading into a war zone. It is very unusual not having a weapon, and you do feel slightly twitchy that you don't. But the GHF crew were incredibly professional. They're all former US soldiers, Marines, Special Forces. They know what they're doing. The vehicles they've got are first rate. And as you go through Rafah, you can just see the place is wrecked, absolutely wrecked. And you're in the cleared zone. So the IDF are providing you protection as well as the GHF members of staff. So it felt pretty safe. The actual distribution itself was chaos, absolute chaos. But still, even with my camera, even pushing forward to the barbed wire, it really didn't feel particularly dangerous.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. So talk to us a little bit about the GHF. I mean, we hear about the chaos. We hear about the things that are happening at these distribution sites. I mean, is this a mission that is, at the end of the day, is it viable? Can the GHF succeed? What's your assessment after watching? I mean, I'm sure they're friendly folks and you enjoyed working with them, but if you're to give your honest assessment of where we're going to be in another month or 2 months, are they the group that can ultimately solve the problems that we're reading about every day in the media?
Look, it's a matter of nuance, as you so rightly said in your introduction. Now, if you're Israel and you want to focus on cleaving Hamas from the aid and thereby cutting off their funds and separating them from the people of Gaza, it's the right scheme. It's still very early. People are judging this on the results they're getting now. They've delivered over 100 million meals, but that's still nowhere near enough to feed the entirety of Gaza. You need a lot more sites. You need a lot more protected routes. You need a lot more personnel on the grounds to actually achieve this mission. And you need to do it fast because people are, as you said, in pockets going hungry. I think it's been, not necessarily brilliantly implemented. I think it might have been an idea to have this up and running before the cessation of all aid into Gaza. I think that was maybe a strategic own goal by Israel. But the model works. It needs to be forward of the Israeli front lines, though. I think people have to walk too far to get there. They're too exposed to fire from the IDF if they step off the track. And quite honestly, I think if your crowd control plan is live fire, you need to get a new plan because as a former soldier, as a former public order expert myself, the idea of using live rounds for crowd control is frankly not one that I'm particularly a fan of.
No, not recommended. I appreciate the nuance and the candor here because I don't think we get enough of it right now for folks on any side of this debate. As I was mentioning earlier, I just don't think people are willing to level any criticism at Israel if you're kind of on the pro-Israel side of things. And certainly we're not seeing any nuance from those that are leveling charges of war crimes on the other side, because I don't think that that's what's happening. I do think that it's a complicated war zone. Everyone that I've talked to has said the same thing, and I'm glad to hear you say it as well. So let's talk about the war itself. I mean, I continue to hear from my contacts in Israel that we're now in an urban war phase, right? This is just asymmetric warfare, not unlike probably what you saw in Afghanistan or American soldiers saw in Iraq. So maybe more to the point, and I'm hearing this as well, is this Israel's Vietnam? Because that's what some people are calling this, that it's kind of an unwinnable war, and that fighting in this asymmetric kind of urban warfare setting is not playing to the strengths of the IDF. What's your assessment as someone who's been a war fighter and now an analyst of military affairs?
I mean, I'm really wary about saying that conflict A is just like conflict B. I mean, that is a trap that I think a lot of analysts fall into. There are people that are saying that Israel should negotiate with Hamas because that's what we did with Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. And it's just a stupid line of argument. This isn't Vietnam. It's not fought in a jungle. There's not an enemy that has the ability to be reinforced over the border and keep that flow of ammunition and personnel coming. Gaza is walled in. They have the enemy surrounded. They've seized 80% of the enemy's territory. Yes, there are tunnels. Yes, there's going to be a counterinsurgency requirement because they will be reverting to RPGs, to anti-armor ambushes, to IEDs, to what we call shoot and scoot, where they pop up a few rounds, pop down again and run away. That's all familiar. But it's in such a condensed area, and they're only going to be able to do that if the IDF are actually present. The areas where Hamas have any real mass or capability, the IDF currently aren't there. They're sort of, as I can understand it, they're making raids in those central areas, but they haven't yet gone in full force. So we have to be very careful about making these comparisons. The danger, I think, is, though, that Israel is moving into strategic drift. They've got two very clear war aims: get the hostages home and defeat Hamas. Hamas are absolutely annihilated. Their leaders are all dead. Most of their cadre from before the war are dead. What fighters are there now are mostly sort of underage recruits who've been given an AK-47 and a box of ammunition. The hostages, hundreds have come home. 20 remain. That's a pretty good effort, and Hamas have shown no inclination and have no motivation to release the remaining hostages. So that's very unlikely to be achieved by military force. So it's a strategic drift, and every bomb Israel drop right now is getting amplified on the international stage, and Israel's getting seriously hammered by their allies or former allies, depending on how you want to frame it. But it's not looking good for Israel on the international stage right now, and even in America, support for the war has dropped to 32%, according to the most recent polls. So
yeah, it's been a pretty brutal news cycle for Israel, and I don't see any signs of it improving. I do want to point out, you've, I think, alluded to something that I've been saying for a long time. those two war aims, I don't think they can be accomplished in tandem. In other words, you want to defeat Hamas, you're probably going to have to give up on retrieving the hostages. You want to get the hostages back, you're probably not defeating Hamas. There is an inherent friction between those two war aims declared by the Israeli government shortly after the October 7th attacks. And I think therein lies at least some of the rub here in terms of that drift, right? That strategic drift. If you can't accomplish both, then what are you doing, right? I think they're going to have to figure out if they want to defeat Hamas. Okay, fine. That might mean that you're going to have to leave some of those hostages behind. And that's not something that anybody wants to say out loud in Israel. And so the drama continues. But I want to kind of just press you on something that you just mentioned, because I think it's really important. The status of that Hamas command structure right now. I mean, I got one of those decks of cards. You probably got one too when you arrived in Israel early on after the war began. And they had, 52 of these Hamas thugs that are, pictured on these cards. When I looked at mine recently, I don't think any of the top Hamas leaders were left inside the country. I think there might have been one or two external leaders that are still kicking around, visiting places like Turkey or living in Qatar. But when you look at that Hamas command structure, some say there's little point in fighting on right now because there are no high value targets. There's literally nobody worth killing, as some people would say. And I actually just saw a report this morning in the Times of Israel to that effect from former senior Israeli military officials. So what do you have to say about this? Is it still worth fighting? Is it still worth dropping those bombs, knowing that every bomb is going to get the scrutiny that you mentioned, knowing that every errant bullet is going to be, you're going to see accusations leveled about war crimes. You continue to see these accusations of famine. Is it worth continuing the war under these circumstances when there's nobody important to kill any longer?
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at what we call the utility of force here, don't we? It's about what you're actually strategically trying to achieve by deploying soldiers into a war zone. Rupert Smith wrote that wonderful book about it. And look, the strategic goals are achieved here. Israel's safe. Hamas can't repeat October the 7th. Hamas are almost entirely destroyed, and the hostages aren't going to come back through military action. So for me, it makes no sense to fight on. I think it's doing Israel far more damage than it possibly could be through keeping going. So, let's look at this seriously and properly and think about how we're going to get the final hostages home. And to me, it looks like trading reconstruction and terrain for hostages. That's the only lever I can really see out there. You lock Gaza down and just say, hey, cool, enjoy the rubble. Now give me my hostages back, and you can have some reconstruction.
And that's exactly, by the way, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say this. I don't know if you read my piece and commentary from about a week ago, but that's basically what I'm arguing as well, is just say, look, you know what, we're leaving. We're not fighting any longer. But you're going to live exactly as you're living now in that rubble that you just described in Rafah that you saw. That's going to be the future of Gaza until you get all the hostages out, maybe hand over some of those rockets, maybe allow for some of those tunnels to be destroyed. But until that time, you're going to be stuck exactly as you are, living in squalor. And I can't imagine that the people of Gaza are going to like that a whole lot. And that could lead to a moment where you're fomenting unrest against the Hamas terrorist organization or whatever's left of it. So I'm actually tickled to hear that you endorse this sort of approach, because I do think that strategically that's the leverage that Israel has right now. I've got one more question for you. You're based in the UK, obviously. What is the story behind your prime minister's recognition or purported or planned recognition of the state of Palestine? I mean, what is driving Keir Starmer to make this move? My sense is that this is all driven by domestic politics, that there's a significant Muslim population in England and he's appeasing them, and maybe he thinks that he's sort of virtue signaling to, I don't know, the liberal Western states that might also agree. But like, what's the sense on the ground in the UK right now? Is this a supported move? Does it feel right for the UK to be weighing in this way?
Look, I think the bottom line here is that it's so disingenuous. He's not recognizing Palestine. He's threatening to do so if Israel doesn't cease fire. He's using it as effectively a blackmail tool. Now, do you know what? If you genuinely believe in recognizing the state of Palestine and you think that's the right thing to do, then just do it. Don't use it as a blackmail tool to try and get a sovereign nation state to bend to your will. It's just ridiculous. The days of the UK writing lines on maps in the Middle East are long, long over, and Mr. Starmer needs to understand that. But clearly, Labour Party, they lost 5 seats to pro-Gaza, only Gaza, single-issue candidates in the last general election. They've lost a slew of council seats ever since then. And it's looking in the next general election as if Mr. Corbyn, the friend of Hamas and Hezbollah, is going to have a party of his own that is also going to bleed votes from them. There are 250,000 Jews in the UK. There are 5 or 6 million Muslims. It's very clear which constituency Mr. Starmer has decided to pander to and which one he has decided to throw to the wolves. And it's a very sad state of affairs, in my opinion.
Shameful indeed. All right, we're going to leave it there on that less than uplifting note. I want to thank you, Andrew Fox, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you so much.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleagues Zvi Khan and Jonathan Tsai have a new insight on FDD's website with a list of 10 Iranian prisons where the regime brutalizes dissidents. Evin Prison is the most infamous, but there are other notorious jails inside Iran known for their sheer savagery with torture methods so vile they violate even the regime's own constitution. At FDD, we say it often, the Iranian people deserve dignity and freedom. The regime is holding this proud country hostage. Meanwhile, in the Washington Reporter, FDD's Ellie Bufkin, otherwise known as History Bufkin, calls out UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer for pledging to recognize a Palestinian state in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and a two-state solution. Ellie rightly argues this kind of virtue signaling only serves to embolden Hamas. If Starmer is serious about peace, he should first demand the release of Israeli hostages and hold Hamas accountable for blocking aid and violating human rights. 650 plus days and counting, and the UK has failed to step up. And finally, if you haven't heard enough from me today, I appeared on Times Radio in England to discuss U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff's visit to Israel and Gaza, where he observed aid and distribution up close, along with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. I'm glad they went, but I'm not convinced either of these two gentlemen have the experience to draw meaningful conclusions about what they saw. Nonetheless, I'm glad they acknowledged Israel's ramped up aid delivery. It's a concrete and welcome step in the right direction, if you ask me. And with that, we're going to stick a fork in it, folks, because we're done. If you're craving more brainy think tank things to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, read our equally smart quick takes on X, or watch those captivating videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. You can also make that all-important tax-deductible donation anytime you wish at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief, a can't-miss episode, in fact, featuring Haviv Reddick-Gore, that terrific Middle East analyst who works with the Times of Israel and the Free Press when he's not producing a podcast of his own. Don't miss this one, guys. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.